I consider the way that I work as being microscopic, which means that in the sense that I build sometimes very large structures, but they are all made of a combination and accumulation of details. So I work very close to, I start with one little detail and then I make it transform into another detail, and then I combine it with another detail, and that's how things grow and sort of build complexity. And I think that the way that I make things is similar to the way that people will experience things. There's a similarity between the process of making and the process of experiencing. I can see the eye of the viewer travel in the piece, and I see a similarity with the way that my hands traveled in the piece while I was making it. It's the same path, the eyes and the hands. When I make a piece, when I make a sculpture, I don't want to control it intellectually. I want it to be able to develop its own intelligence, because I want it to be able to generate meaning. But I want it to be like a person, like an individual. I want it to be able to generate meaning, not have a meaning. So my goal was to make the biggest plexiglass box I could. So I made the biggest box I could that would fit into my studio. So there was not a lot of room left around it. So I had to make the piece. All these elements, a lot of them, most of them were done from the inside of the piece, because I didn't really have so much space outside of the work to work. So I had to use this as a studio. So that's why if you look at it, there's a lot of tables and shelves and that I used as work tables and that I just decided to leave in there. So that's something that I always like also, and it refers back to I like to use the body of individuals, of people as a model, is that they're sort of made from the inside. Every individual makes him or herself from the inside. So I like that the piece is done like that. So all the materials that have been used to make this piece are still there inside, and that's why I decided it was appropriate to leave my hand in there. So my hand is almost everywhere in the piece, and all the references to making sculptures are still, I wanted them to stay there. So you can see the sculpture making itself from the inside. One of the things that I tried to do, one of the effects that I tried to do is give the impression that to the viewer that he or she could see everything at once, just standing here, because it's so transparent. I like the idea that one would feel like they can see everything from one point, but then actually as they start getting closer, they realize that they can only see a small portion of it. So this is an area where I started making this structure. You see it how it gives the impression like it's growing. A sort of like branch made of a clay that I use. And if you follow it in space, you see that it's traveling through the piece this way, and then it sort of ends up, you realize that it's actually, they're kind of like branches where melons are growing. So you can see these melons that have ears, sort of, and if you follow, there's even some melons that are kind of sticking out of the piece, ears and nose. These melons are actually used in that little studio area by the hands to make a head. So the piece itself generates a sort of a branch or plant where the melons grow, and these melons are used by the hands to make a head that you could imagine. Then the head would go somewhere else in the piece, like could become something like this head, for example. You could imagine that that one used to be a melon, you know, a long time ago. You can also see that the hands are using the hair that comes from a crystallizing werewolf head. Down there, you can see it. And they're using the hair coming from that werewolf head to make the new head from a melon. For me, it's clear that the body of a person, the body of an individual, is the most amazing thing in the world. You know, I think that even compared to any art, I mean, individual are much more extraordinary than anything that could be invented, you know. They contain infinity, they contain potential, and they generate things rather than represent things. They are, you know, and there's this thing. So I've always really considered the body to be a model. Like, if I'm able to make a sculpture that will exist in space, in the world, the same way a body does, that would be amazing. I mean, I'm very inspired also by you know, I keep referring to the body and the organs and nervous system, but I really like the idea of the brain. And I like the idea that, you know, that these little darker spaces would be like spaces that are hiding deep inside the back of the brain, for example, with hidden secrets, or, you know. So I like, really interested in the architecture of the mind, and how in the mind you can imagine, you can make a model of the mind as like a series of different spaces, you know, that are, some of them are locked and inaccessible, and some of them are deeper, and some of them are more superficial. I was really obsessed with trying to find infinity inside a very specific volume, you know? I mean, my dream is to be able to create something that would be bigger inside than it is outside, you know? The volume would be bigger inside than the volume outside. So, so that's why there's so many details inside the piece, because I want, because the amount, the quantity of details and the suggestion that things always transform is something that can be connected to infinity. It's a way of representing infinity. It's the way of. So I mean, I think that's why I was obsessed with just making things evolve and add details. And if you come back in a few days, you kind of expect the piece to have a different shape. Things are never set. You know, I don't like when things have a specific role. If something starts to have a specific role, I want to force it in a different direction. You know, I want everything to become slippery and to be running away from our intellectual control. You know, I don't want to control things, because then if you're able to control something, then it means it's not like a person. It's not like, it doesn't have that sort of power of always avoiding your grasp or your intellectual control. I think it makes it more intelligent, you know? So, for example, mirrors. You can imagine that mirrors, the role of the mirror is solely to reflect space. So mirrors should be perfect, clean, but in a certain way, I don't like that. I like that it has the power to reflect space, to multiply space. But then, if you break it, it becomes a physical object. So I like that shift. I like the fact that the mirror is has the power of multiplying space. So the mirror, so I like this aspect of mirror, like it's not physical, it doesn't exist. You can't look at a mirror, because when you look at a mirror, actually you're looking at what it reflects. You're not looking at the mirror itself, because it sort of doesn't exist in a certain way visually. But the second you smash it, you're making it become a super physical object. So I love that shift. I like that within the same piece, you can see different, like the same material, for example, the same material in different parts of the piece, in different stages of transformation. So for example, if you look closely, here in the front, there's a sort of like field of little blue flowers that are made of sequin, blue sequin, because I just thought that the blue was very captivating, or I don't know how to say, but you would remember that color. So you can see here it's in the shape of a field of flowers. If you go around the piece, you will see, I don't know if you can see it from here. You can see it here, down there. You can see the hands that are actually braiding those blue sequins. And then in the back of the piece, there's the singer with a dress that was completely made with the same sequins. So I refer to her as a singer because, at the beginning when I was thinking of an opera, I needed a singer. I also needed an orchestra or a choir, so the pineapples were meant to be a choir or something. Then the piece took a different route and I stopped the opera. But I didn't want to get, I don't want to get rid of the process. It's just in the time of the production of the piece. That's one chapter. So I don't want to erase it. It gives a history to the work. When I integrate objects in the piece, I want them to be able to evolve and grow and move. So I like the idea that every object that's in the piece has the potential of transforming. Just because as a sculptor, I want to be able to make the whole structure and the whole sculpture grow and evolve. I want to not know how the piece is going to transform. So I make sure that everything I include in the work is a source, is a potential source. So if you go around the piece, there's a lot of thread in the piece, but if you go around the piece, you will see spools of thread that I see as sources. So you can imagine that all the thread in the piece is coming from the spools. Here the thread is coming out of holes in the base and shaping itself through plexiglass to create some sort of, delicate flower. In the front of the piece, there's a puddle, a sort of purple, transparent puddle that you can imagine being juice of a fruit or whatever. And if you follow where the juice is coming from, and if you go back up the troughs, where there's liquid pouring in the troughs, if you go back to its origin, you will see that there's a fruit there. So, for example, the fruits become a potential source for either a plant to grow or juice to fall from it and become something else and take a different shape. So every element in there is sort of like a source, either the fruit or the spool or even the body. For example, the body of the werewolf that becomes a source because it's sort of crystallizing. It's also throwing its arm in space. The arm is multiply, and the arm is actually, if you're looking at it, if you follow the arm of the werewolf, you will see that the arm is multiplied to create a sort of animation. And if you follow the arm, you will see that it's simply trying to catch a grape. That's another way of using the werewolf as a source. So things multiply from it. There's bananas traveling through the piece to create some sort of movement or cloud, or I refer to it as a swarm of bananas. But then you see that some of the ants, there's ants all over the piece, and some of the ants are carrying banana slices on which I've written letters, and I sometimes use these banana slices with letters to spell sentences that are here and there inside the piece. I think they're also a way of helping the eye travel, because they give you a path. You know, it's exactly like, and they even look like that, like dotted lines. I start with an empty container, and then I make one object, and I figure out a way of placing that object inside of the plexiglass box. And that object, I consider it to be the heart of the piece. It is the first thing. It's the first element. It's what will become the source of everything that builds itself around. At the end, for the viewer, it's impossible to know what is the heart. I can tell you that in that piece, the heart was that werewolf figure over there. I started with that. I can tell you a little story that I thought of after, because I've been obsessed with making werewolf heads that are crystallizing. So at one point in my practice, I thought, okay, what could be a very energetic object, an object that would almost like function like a battery, you know, like a battery. So an object that would look like it's able to generate energy because of its intensity and its inner tensions. So I thought of, very intuitively, oh, what about a werewolf head, like a severed werewolf head that's crystallizing? And I thought that was a very intense object. So I thought of a little story after the fact, and I imagine the man or the woman transforms into a werewolf, and it's the most intense transformation that you can conceive, that you can imagine, because you go from one state of physical and mental identity to a completely opposite one within like a few seconds, you know? So it's an extremely intense transformation. Right after the transformation is over, the head is chopped. It's placed on a table, and it immediately crystallizes instead of rotting, because it's so filled with energy, the whole energy of the connected to the transformation, that it immediately, that whole energy makes the head crystallize immediately. So then I end up with like this very intense object that's suggestive, crystallizing werewolf head, that's suggestive of transformation, that contains great tension between the mineral aspect of it and the organic aspect of it, between the seductive aspect, because of the crystals, these heads end up looking like jewels, you know, so the seductive versus the repulsive, huge tensions. So I end up with this object that sort of, I feel like, is able to generate energy, almost like a battery. And then I can use that object and place it in structures like that, in more or less cold structures, and use them as batteries, or I like to say organs, you know? I place these heads these objects here and there. And then I try to give the feeling like there's energy travel, that like they are generating energy and helping the energy travel from one to the other, from one object to the other, by connecting these objects either with chain or thread, or there's all sorts of strategies that I can use to make sure that the energy is able to circulate inside the sculpture. As you can see, there's fruits all over the piece. And the fruits are all dripping. For example, if you look on the right side, there's pineapples, pieces of pineapples that are dripping. You can see here there's like the drippings of the pineapple juice. Here you can see it's a werewolf. I know it's difficult to identify as a werewolf, but if you look very closely, you can see that it's a squatting werewolf and it's eating grapes. And the grapes are producing juice that is falling inside certain troughs. See? Now the trough goes outside the piece. You can see the grape juice sort of traveling through the piece. And then I imagine that all the juices from all the piece are converging and forming this sort of like mass of juice that's pouring outside of the piece, in the front of the piece, and creating a puddle. As if that was the converging point of all the juices of the piece. And so I thought it was interesting to make reference to that, because it's such a specific, tight little moment. So the title is The Flux and the Puddle, because the flux is about that great general movement, and then the puddle is this sort of small, modest result. So I liked it. It would be like saying the cosmos and the cookie. I don't know, but like something grand and then something really modest. I mean, I'm not necessarily interested so much in the aesthetic of science or laboratory aesthetic, like petri dishes and stuff like that, even though it's sort of, sometimes it feels like I do. I'm not so interested in that, but I'm really interested in how nature sort of forms itself, like the infinite complexity of nature is the result of accidents and mutations and movements, and I'm really inspired by that. Yeah. The piece was not made to be seen from above like that with such a distance. It's the first time I see it like that. So, and that might sound really pretentious, and I don't want it to sound, I don't mean it like that, but for me it's a little bit like seeing the Earth from outer space. Like the Earth is something that you don't have any distance from because you're living in it. And I think that's the relationship I have with this specific piece. It's so large, and I'm usually forced to be so close to it that I'd see it almost as an environment, and then all of a sudden to see it from a distance like that is really touching for me. Just the idea that, oh my God, it's so big, but it feels so small. It feels like I could grab, like, it's all in there, it's all, I can see it all at once. I have a relationship with my work as an as the author of the work, that is, I see the work as quite independent from me. So it's a little bit like when you're a parent and you look at your children. I mean, you consider that your children are coming from you. Most of the time, they have half of your genetic system, and you teach them like a few things, like some rules of politeness, or you teach them how to speak and how to use certain words, but they really develop into some people that are completely independent. And so as you step back, as they get older and you step back, all that's left to do is, whoa, I can't believe that came from me, you know? Because it's become something that's sort of beyond me. I would love the viewer to just be really excited and satisfied by experiencing complexity without feeling like they have to understand a specific meaning. You know, for example, when you go in nature, when you walk in the forest, you don't have to understand how like the biological aspect and the physical aspect of trees and the genetic system of and how does the frog reproduce. You don't have to understand that. You're able to just, you know, you're able to sort of appreciate it for its complexity. And you're even able to be in awe of like that infinite complexity without having to understand the details. And I don't think that the fact that you're not understanding the details makes it less profound. It can be an even more profound experience. And I wish that people were more free to let themselves experience art and culture the same way, you know? You know, because very often, I don't know how it is in Denmark, but very often in North America, you know, there's I don't know. There's very much of people enter museums, especially contemporary art museums, with a lot of prejudice because they feel like they sort of have to understand specific meanings. And if they don't understand, then they're going to feel stupid. And who wants to feel stupid? Nobody wants to feel stupid, you know? My point is that nobody is stupid. And everybody is allowed to either love or hate, and just, you know, loosen up, you know, and sort of loosen up and let yourself be fascinated by complexity.